Dear students, this is BA Part 3rd class of paper 1st, and today I am going to explain you the literary term free verse. Free verse is a poetry form that does not have a rhyme scheme or a consistent metrical pattern. The French term for free verse is vers libre. It's a type of poetry that does not contain patterns of rhyme or meter. Free verse is considered an open form of poetry as opposed to poetry written in structure or form and tends to follow natural speech patterns and rhythms. While some rhyme and rhythm may occur in free verse poems, the poet does not adhere to strict patterns. However, this does not imply that free verse has no guiding principles. Indeed, free verse generally contains poetic lines and poetic imagery that distinguish it from prose. We can say that verse which has controlled rhythm but not the regular stress pattern of traditional versification is a free verse, and the lines are often of irregular length and varying syllabic stress. Several poets of the 20s and 30s used free verse extensively. This form of poetry gives greater freedom to the writer to develop an idea or image and to create artistic effects. Most free verse also has irregular line lengths and lacks rhyme. Within these broad confines, there are a great variety of measures labeled as free verse. Now here it is important to know the difference between free verse and blank verse. Blank verse sounds like it could be very similar to the definition of free verse, but there is one key difference. Blank verse is written with strict poetic meter, usually in iambic pentameter, without rhyme at the end of the line, whereas free verse contains no such adherence to a regular rhythm while also maintaining an absence of rhyme scheme. So this is the key difference between a blank verse and a free verse. Now, what's the significance of free verse in literature? Free verse has been a growing trend in poetry over the last 100 years or so, to the extent that it is now difficult to find much contemporary poetry being written in any other format. Means usually the writers or the poets, they follow this type of format or say this form of poetry when they write. There were some free verse poems written before the 1800s, especially in other languages. In English, however, the first famous practitioners of free verse were 19th century authors such as Walt Whitman and Matthew Arnold. They later influenced free verse poets such as Allen Ginsberg, William Carlos Williams, and Ezra Pound. Most poets now eschew rhyme and strict rhythm in favor of the more open possibilities of free verse. Now there are different types of free verse. Free verse is an open form, which means it has no predetermined structure and no prescribed length. Since there is no rhyme scheme and no set metrical pattern, there are no specific rules for line breaks or stanza divisions. Some free verse poems are so short they might not resemble poems at all. In the early 20th century, a group who called themselves Imagists wrote spare poetry that focused on concrete images. The poets avoided abstract philosophies and obscure symbols. Sometimes they even abandoned punctuation. The Red Wheelbarrow, a 1923 poem by William Carlos Williams, is free verse in the Imagist tradition. In just 16 words, Williams paints a precise picture affirming the importance of small details. Other free verse poems succeed at expressing powerful emotions through run on sentences, hyperbolic language, chanting rhythms, and rambling digressions. Perhaps the best example is Allen Ginsberg's 1956 poem Howl, written in the tradition of the beat movement of the 1950s. Howl is more than 2,900 words long and can be read as three strikingly lengthy run on sentences. Then Ezra Pound used it frequently, and we can say that he championed free verse, believing, I quote, "No good poetry is ever written in a manner 20 years old, for to write in such a manner shows conclusively that the writer thinks from books, convention, and cliche and not from life." Between 1915 and 1962, Pound wrote his sprawling epic, The Cantos, mostly in free verse. Students, today free verse dominates the poetry scene. 21st century poets chosen to be the poets laureate of the United States have worked mainly in the free verse mode. Free verse is also the preferred form for winners of the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry and the National Book Award for Poetry. In her classic text, A Poetry Handbook, Mary Oliver calls free verse the music of conversation and yes, time spent with a friend. So students, that's all for today. Thank you.